and welcome to this May 12th, 2021 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this format we're using in response to Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives order. This format enables the City Council to meet and take care of business while keeping everyone safe. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling in to one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. Thank you all for joining us on this gorgeous sunny day. So with that, I will turn it over to the city manager to introduce the first topic.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is planning day at the Eugene City Council. So our first work session is on the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan Update. And I'm joined here by a number of those teammates. And I believe I'm turning it over to Chelsea, but I'm not 100% sure. And then I have a couple of comments I want to say before we talk about the ADUs. So with that, you're good to go, Chelsea.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, hopefully folks are just seeing my slides without the notes.
Yes, looks good. Looks good.
Thank you. So hi, Mayor, councilors. I'm Chelsea Hartman. I'm a senior planner in the planning division, and I'm the project manager for the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan. And I also wanted to acknowledge some other team members who are here today and will be helping with the presentation and discussion. We have Kate Purley and John Belcher, our Community Advisory Committee co-chairs. And then from city staff, we have Elena Domingo and Terry Harding. And from Lane County staff, we have Jared Bowder. The purpose of today's work session is to provide an update on the neighborhood plan and seek direction to move into the adoption phase. We've been checking in with you all at each milestone to keep all stakeholders in the loop and maintain a collaborative process. Today, we will be asking for council initiation of a public review and adoption process, including associated comprehensive plan and refinement plan amendments, zone changes, and land use code amendments to support adoption of the neighborhood plan. We'll start with a project overview touching on the phases and outreach. Then we'll do an overview of the neighborhood plan and action plan. And finally, we'll discuss the neighborhood plan's adoption package and next steps. Now I'd like to pass it over to Kate.
Hi, thanks for being here today. So our River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan is a collaborative effort between the City of Eugene, Lane County, the River Road Community Organization, the Santa Clara Community Organization, all of our special district stakeholders, and this plan is going to guide our neighborhoods for decades to come in terms of growth, development, and change. We've been 2 decades in the making before we even initiated this plan, River Road and Santa Clara. We've been working together, reaching out to our neighborhoods, trying to find out what our neighbors value and how they want their future to look. And we're confident that our robust public involvement throughout this plan will give us a product that reflects our community's expectations. So the way we've been working on our plan, we have a project management team, which is made up of Lane County and City of Eugene staff, and the 2 co-chairs of the Citizen Advisory Committee, which are myself and John Belcher. And we meet every 2 weeks for the last 4 years. And then the next sphere of influence would be our full Community Advisory Committee members. And that's 5 members from River Road and 5 from Santa Clara. They were nominated by the community organizations and appointed by the Planning Commission. We also each have an alternate member, and then there's a 11th CAC member who represents specifically areas outside the UGB, but still inside our neighborhood boundaries. After the CAC, we have what we call our working groups. And these are sort of ad hoc, flexible groups of people that are working on specific topic areas in the neighborhood plan. They total about 75 residents who put in hundreds of hours so far, and they get to sort of focus their efforts and their interests on the topics that are most meaningful to them, and they can choose to participate as their lives allow. And then at critical junctures, we've been reaching out to the general public over the last 4 years, and they have primarily been large-scale public events at North Eugene High School, and we are in the process of getting ready to have to do some more public outreach in this new way of reaching out, and we're not really 100% certain how that's going to work, but we're working through that. Bing! Okay, so our project was initiated in the fall of 2017. Our early phases of work consisted of us asking our neighbors what they value now and what their hopes and visions were for the future. The Community Advisory Committee and the working groups took this information, and we crafted goals and policies that reflect the residents' visions and priorities. In 2019, the City Council and the Board of County Commissioners approved our draft goals and policies as a platform for moving into the action planning phase. And since then, we've been focusing on drafting, evaluating, and prioritizing actions to implement the policies. This has taken us a bit longer. We are on our third staff lead, and we are having a much more collaborative process than originally intended. And we've had a 1-year global pandemic sidebar. So it's a little bit slower than we expected, but we're making good progress again. And right now we are preparing to move to the adoption phase. The adoption of our neighborhood plan will provide city policy direction and guide implementation of the neighborhood plan into the future. Bing! So the plan itself is structured by topic area. So on the left side of your screen, we have 5 topic areas: economic development, transportation, parks and natural resources, land use, and community. Inside of each of these topic areas, we have visions, and these are the aspirational statements that describe the best outcomes for the look, feel, and function of our neighborhood for the next 20 to 30 years. From those visions, we made goals. They are the hopes for the future, and they're taken directly from the language in the visions. Underneath that are nested the policies, which are statements adopted to provide a consistent course of action to move toward the goals. And then separately, we have what we call the action plan. And these are the strategies to implement the policies. And they're a separate standalone plan that's slightly more flexible and responsive to change over time. Ding!
So, like Kate mentioned, the neighborhood plan sets the policy direction, and the action plan is intended to capture community identified ideas that are possible ways to implement the policies. Like Kate mentioned, it's dynamic and will be non-regulatory in nature, and really is meant to provide a framework for how we will continue to collaborate to support implementation of the plan after it's adopted. The action plan doesn't determine all of the details now because actions may change as things or as priorities and circumstances evolve into the future. So over the past year or so, we've been prioritizing the actions that are particularly important and impactful to the community. We've also been adding general estimates for budget, timeframe, and feasibility. And we've been identifying the different project types that are listed here. It's important to note that there are community priorities across all of the different project types, but we will be focusing on the code-related actions today, since many of those can be implemented as part of the neighborhood plan adoption package. An important outcome of this work is continued plan implementation and collaboration between the community, city, county, and partner agency staff. Adoption of the neighborhood plan will be one significant accomplishment, but implementation of the community vision does not end there. Neighborhood plans need continued implementation support after adoption. To support implementation of this plan, the city is anticipating shifting toward a planning district approach to support coordination of a variety of our efforts while working towards more equitable outcomes throughout Eugene. This approach is inspired by Eugene's Parks and Recreation System Plan, which uses neighborhood planning districts to conduct geographically based planning, which allows for the consideration of the unique characteristics and opportunities of each area. One implementation tool will be an annual coordination and information sharing meeting between the River Road and Santa Clara community representatives and city and county staff to share work that's been completed, new community priorities, and plan for upcoming efforts.
So this slide talks about our action plan highlights, and those are items that we've heard time and time again from community members that are really important to them in this neighborhood planning process. Exclusive of the action plan actions, we also have themes that cut across all the different topic areas. And some of these themes are equity and inclusion, connectivity, healthy people and climate, safety, prosperity, and neighborhood identity, that outside circle. And then the inside represents actions that are nested in every single topic area, that every topic area thinks that collaboration to implement the action items and monitoring the outcomes along the way to help adjust the action plan are important regardless of topic area. For land use actions that we have that are going to require code amendments, the staff's recommended phased implementation based on community priorities, staff capacity, and available resources. So we've divided these land use actions that require code changes into 3 groups. The group 1 actions are actions that staff's recommended be implemented with the adoption of the neighborhood plan. The group 2 actions will need ongoing collaboration with related city or county projects that have already been initiated or are coming in the pipeline. And the group 3 action items are remaining code actions that still have yet to be actualized as processes and resources allow, but they'll need to be initiated and prioritized by decision makers like yourselves to receive their needed funding and staff resources. Lots of the community priorities that require code amendments are being recommended by staff to be implemented with the plan adoption package, but there are some that still are outliers and they need a third way toward finding their home in becoming actual policy. Ding.
Thanks, Kate. So the neighborhood plan adoption package will include the neighborhood plan itself. And like Kate mentioned, it represents the community vision through goals and policies and will eventually be a formally adopted, legally binding land use plan. It'll be supported by the non-regulatory action plan, which will help guide implementation. The adoption package will also include comprehensive plan and refinement plan, and land use code amendments to implement certain actions to support the community vision. This includes the group 1 code actions that Kate mentioned, which are recommended with the adoption package. Most of these will primarily be implemented through the draft special area zone that was developed as part of the River Road Corridor study. Key code themes include a vibrant mixed-use corridor to support 20-minute neighborhoods, transition and compatibility standards, a Willamette Greenway overlay to provide standards for development adjacent to the river, and increasing opportunities for urban agriculture and animal keeping. We're also discussing possible ways to connect the River Road Corridor study concepts to the middle housing code amendment efforts. For example, piloting ideas to encourage middle housing within walking distance of River Road. Finally, the adoption package will include plan designation and zone changes, which will help encourage active neighborhood centers and a variety of housing types. Depending on the location, these changes may require city approval, county approval, or both. The plan designation and zone changes being considered are all within Eugene's urban growth boundary, or UGB, and any proposed zoning code changes outside our city limits, but within the UGB, will only occur and become effective as property owners choose to annex. City and county decision makers will both be asked to direct staff to prepare the neighborhood plan adoption package, including the policies and land use diagram. However, most of the land use code changes will only apply within the city limits and require city adoption, while only a few specific code actions will involve the county. Those differences are noted in attachment B in your packet, with specific actions that would involve the county highlighted in blue. We provided project updates to the Eugene Planning Commission in March and to the Lane County Planning Commission in April. And both commissions expressed general support for moving into the adoption phase and preparing the plan adoption package. Both commissions also asked to remain involved throughout the adoption phase and emphasize the importance of early outreach. Next week, on May 18th, we will also be meeting with the Lane County Board of Commissioners to seek direction to move into the adoption phase and prepare the adoption package, focusing on the components that will require county approval. Once there's clear direction from the elected officials, we'll prepare the adoption package and launch a corresponding phase of outreach. An overview of the adoption phase timeline is shown here. The community outreach will include newsletters, virtual input opportunities, involvement of the two community organizations, mail notices, and direct outreach to residents, businesses, and property owners. This input will help inform the eventual community recommendation from both the River Road and Santa Clara community organizations, as well as the Community Advisory Committee, which will then be forwarded to the Eugene and Lane County Planning Commissions to begin the formal adoption process in winter 2022. Today, we are asking for council direction to move into the adoption phase to prepare the neighborhood plan's adoption package, including developing detailed code language for community vetting as outlined in attachment B. At this point, I'd like to refer to the council options and suggested motion in your packet and open it up for discussion and questions. And finally, for more information, you can visit our project website or our newly launched Engage Eugene page that are listed here. And thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much. It is continues to be so encouraging and inspiring how this planning endeavor moves forward. And yes, with the little distraction of a pandemic thrown in the middle. So really appreciate the level of coordination and community involvement and commitment to doing this work. And I do want to say, and I'll turn it over to council, that I really appreciated the council materials and the way you presented them. It was very easy to understand and the insights were helpful and the highlighting was so thank you, because it's complicated and you're in the middle of it and we're not. And so I did find the materials extremely helpful. So thank you for that. And I see that Claire has her hand raised, so I will turn to her.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Kate and Chelsea, for walking us through that. I am so excited that we're at this point of this project. It's been a long haul, way longer than I've been on council. And the amount of work and thoughtfulness and caring that folks from both neighborhoods have put into both the informal work before we got, some funding to do it. And now the formal work has just been so impressive and so appreciated. And then your patience as we went through multiple staff changes in terms of lead on the project and concerns that, is it still going to continue? Are we going to have the same level of support? So I also want to appreciate the city manager's ongoing commitment to the project and the excellent work of our staff. I don't have any technical questions right now. I mean, my understanding is we're going to put this out for a public hearing. We'll get some feedback. I might have more comments after other councilors have had a chance to weigh in, but I just wanted to start with that acknowledgement and appreciation.
Thank you. And I see Mike had his hand raised.
Thank you, Mayor. I apologize. I can't, the little fake hand piece here is not, the button isn't available. I don't remember how to fix that. So in any event, I echo everything that Claire just said, and strong thanks to Kate, Chelsea, to John, to all the members of the community out there who've worked on this as well, longer than I've been a counselor. So I know the investment. I've seen it over time. I remember listening to Kate before I was a city councilor talking about the importance of this work at Santa Clara Community Organization meetings, and I admired what did you say? Every other week for 4 years? Is that what you said? You guys meet regularly to go through this? Holy cow. We think we have a lot of meetings. These guys have been working hard for a very long time. And I honor both the process and the work that you've done, and in full support of the plan and what you're doing. I had just a couple of questions. Number one, did we do any kind of analysis in this process for any sort of unexpected or unintended built-in motive incentives for someone not to want to annex into the city? In other words, are we, with any of the regulatory pieces that we would put in place because of the 190 agreements and so forth, that you have to annex in order to develop? Are we incentivizing not annexing in any way that you're aware? And I guess that's a question that's not just for staff, it's certainly for Kate and John too.
Yeah, I would say I don't believe so. I think our hope is to make standards more the same in the neighborhoods and just encourage development that is compatible. But I don't know, John, it looks like you had thoughts there.
Actually not. I mean, I can't think of anything, Mike. The only thing that comes close is the county allows ADUs to be built now without annexing, but that's not us.
Right.
There's nothing that I can think of. You still have to annex in order to develop.
Yeah. Okay. I just wondered if that was a part of the process at all. Secondarily, I would ask staff, Chelsea, you mentioned the ongoing process, the monitoring and the collaboration work that will be done as new issues arise in time and are applied to then this, let's shoot forward and say adopted neighborhood plan. Can you talk in more detail about that resolution process?
As far as the monitoring piece, we are coordinating to see what information from the overall citywide growth monitoring can help us see how we're measuring and meeting those outcomes that are identified in the plan. So kind of in the next phase of work, we'll be looking at what metrics might be out there to see how we are working towards the goals that are in the plan. And then other things aren't necessarily measured with data. It'll be more of if we're getting transportation funding to do projects in the neighborhoods. And really, I think our intent with the implementation and coordination is just to improve our coordination and collaboration. I think a lot of it happens already, but just trying to be more intentional about that moving forward. Just for example, I know our transportation planning staff has applied for a few different projects for funding in these two areas. And some have been successful, some are in process. And I think the neighborhood plan has been a good effort of how city staff and county staff and the two communities can kind of work together to support moving those things forward.
And if the city or the county were in conflict with the plan in some way, how would that collaboration look? What would the resolution look like?
I'm sorry, I think the first part broke up for me.
I said, if, for example, the city or the county were implementing something in conflict with the plan, how would that resolution look?
Well, it's a good question. So the plan, once it's adopted, the policies will provide the official city and county policy direction for primarily land use decisions in this area. And some of the goals are more aspirational. So I think it would be, hopefully we wouldn't be doing that since it is an adopted plan that we both acknowledge. And I think we're all pretty familiar with, not just planning staff, I think transportation and parks and stormwater. I think that knowledge of what's in the plan is out there. And we'll still have that community accountability side of things, of advocates continuing to push things forward and making sure implementing the plan.
What does that look like, advocates?
I think it's something we're still figuring out. It looks like, Kate, do you have thoughts on this one?
Well, I guess what I was just wanting to express is that in the past, most refinement plans or neighborhood plans have been primarily land use plans. And this plan, as a neighborhood plan, is far more diverse than that, right? We have all 5 topic areas, including economic development, which generally doesn't lie in other neighborhood plans, and natural resources. And it's such an enormous land mass that we're planning for that it's not possible to implement the plan fully at the time of plan adoption, because it's so wide reaching and so far reaching in terms of its temporal implementation over time. So that's the idea of trying to just set up the expectation for you, the decision makers, that this isn't a typical one and done plan, that we're going to need to collaborate over the next 30 years with the county and the city to make all the different aspects of the plan come to fruition. And we realize that we're not the only neighborhood in the entire city of Eugene, and that there is a competition for resources. But what we're looking for is the acknowledgement that moving forward, there's a new way of working with refinement plans and continued implementation for all the different neighborhoods over time, because that's going to be or that's the perceived idea of how we're going to do planning by area instead of just by neighborhood. And we just happen to be 2 neighborhoods that make up one of those planning district areas. Well, and yes,
I agree
and
with
so
that.
ongoing advocacy looks like people from the community organization looking at the plan, looking at ongoing projects from the city and the county, and then coming to decision makers saying, okay, well, so these were the items in our action plan that have been identified as important to the neighborhood that's in this adopted plan, and these are the things you're looking at doing this year, and we would like to be considered to be part of that moving forward. I think that's how we envision that.
And I would like the full and robust public process there. But Chelsea, let's say hypothetically the council has a requirement that we have to increase density, we have to double density in a particular area of this plan. How would we work with that? How would we resolve that together?
I think it would probably be similar to what the Middle Housing Code Amendment process is looking like now, and exploring what changes would have to occur. So one of the things we're hoping to do with the neighborhood plan is a special area zone that will increase density, but maybe not as much as like the state bill that died would have proposed doing. And so if something like that, a new state law comes out and kind of overrides what we have in the plan, then amendments would have to be explored at that time. But our hope is, I think we are working towards a lot of those broader state goals and citywide goals in this neighborhood plan, and the Envision Eugene goals as well.
But our thinking is to involve a robust public process before implementing something like that. Would I be right? Thank you, Mayor. Okay, thanks, Chelsea.
Yeah, and Mike, if you needed a second round, just let me know that. Next up is Alan and then Randy.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I totally agree with Claire's comments. Well said, Claire. And I'm very supportive of the motion. Kate and John, thank you for doing this and shepherding this through, and your patience and commitment to your part of the town. This is a long time coming, but it's a really good plan. And I really love that it does go, as Kate said, beyond just land use. So I totally appreciate all of the neighbors' stick-to-itiveness in getting this done. So, unfortunately, I think for other neighborhoods, you guys have set the bar pretty darn high for collaboration and working through a plan. So I really look forward to the public review and adoption process. Ding.
Thank you. Randy and then Matt.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Chelsea and staff, for doing an excellent job and putting this together. I appreciate the time that went into it. A very, very high quality product. But I also want to specifically call out Kate and John. I sat and watched you for years as a department head and been involved with a number of half-day and full-day workshops where we worked together and broke bread. And just watching you help push this forward and the passion you brought to it and the expertise that you developed, I just don't know that we'd be anywhere near where we are without your commitment to this process. And I think that needs to be underlined. And my colleagues have already been saying that, but I just wanted to share from a slightly different perspective that I was able to observe this pretty much from the beginning. So thank you. I too will be in support of this. I really look forward to the next steps. I'm still concerned about how annexation occurs, and it seems to be moving at glacial speed. But and I worry about the way service delivery has to work in the area with the island annexation that has gone on for so many years. So I do look forward to resolving that. I look forward to having consistency in our codes at some point as we continue to move forward, but I'm very much in support of where we are now. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and then Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. Sharing my gratitude as well. Thanks, Chelsea, Kate, and John for the presentation and the work. And there are a couple things that I hear, and I just would welcome some clarification around. When I hear mixed use corridors, I could interpret that as a commercial and residential mixed use, but I'm interested keenly in a mixed economy as well, in addition to the missing middle, ensuring that there's an eye for affordable housing. And when this process started, I suspect that affordable housing and low-income pathways to housing weren't necessarily on top of mind as they are today. But whether it's the creation of a special area zone or building or encouraging active neighborhood centers, as well as, quote, a variety of housing types, I just want to plant a seed or add my voice to the many calling for additional investments in low income, affordable housing, as well as missing middle, and supporting housing of all income levels along our transportation corridors.
Thank you, Emily, and then Jennifer.
Mayor, I think John had his hand to respond to that.
Oh, sorry, John.
That's okay.
Go for it.
Oh, thank you. First of all, it takes two neighborhoods to do a plan. Kate and I are both here, but we are not the only people by far. So thank you for your accolades, but they need to be spread further. But to answer your question, Councilor Keating, we actually do have action items that specifically try to provide economic stability at the local level. And we also have action items to provide both affordable housing and housing affordability. Now, they're action items. They haven't been fleshed out as to how they're going to achieve it, but they're definitely our aspirational goal.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Emily, and then Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you for this excellent report. I also appreciated the tables and the way you divided it up into three different areas that we need to work on, and what we can do easily, and what all the way up to we can only ask other entities like the state to help us with it. And I look forward to this being a template for the other areas. It's been a long time coming, so I hope that having this template will make the next neighborhoods and areas go more smooth, well, not more smoothly, but more quickly. I think this is a very impressive example of outreach. And after my experience with the special land area zone, I've been hoping for that to happen. I do have a question about special area zones that you mentioned here, and going along with the new state requirements since the Court of Appeals decision. It sounds like you're going to deal with that later. Why would you not do it now?
So I think what we're doing with the special area zone is really focusing on mixed use and higher density residential development. And then we're also closely coordinating with the middle housing code amendments to see what we are able to do to support middle housing and really encourage it even more next to the corridor. And so far, those are the only state requirements that we're doing. I think I mentioned earlier that there was a bill that would have increased density on corridors, but that did not go through. So right now, it's really just middle housing code that we'll be looking to comply with.
Well, that's what I'm interested in. So I don't understand. Is there more coming that you want to wait, do it all together? Is that how it works? I'm curious because I'm in the middle of a special area zone conflict. And so I was wondering how that was being dealt with the new special area zone.
Not that we're aware of. So I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that, like Terry or Alyssa or anyone else.
No, I think what I'm hearing Chelsea say is that the part of the work of putting together the special area zone will be to coordinate and make sure it's in compliance with middle housing.
Okay, so I mean, I guess I got ahead of it. It's not written yet. It's okay. Thanks. Good job.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer.
Thanks. I just wanted to quickly add my praise to all the staff and to Kate and to John and everyone who isn't here that put in a lot of time. This is an important moment in this process, and it really makes me thankful that we have a neighborhood association system that could support this and could bring people together. And I agree, you guys have really made the model, and it was so thoughtful to go beyond land use, like Kate was pointing out, and just incorporating all of these other important components into this plan. And hopefully it will be the way that these processes go into the future. So I don't have any questions. I just think it's amazing that we're here, and I'm so looking forward to the next steps in this process.
Thank you. And Claire, second round.
Yeah, thanks. So I just wanted to ask Chelsea, if you could elaborate a little bit on this planning district concept that you referenced, because you referenced it pretty quickly and didn't really elaborate on it. And so that's a new approach that I think we'd like to hear a little bit more about.
That's a great thing. So I will start, and then I'll ask if Terry wants to add anything, because I think it was one of her ideas. So I think our general hope is that we can kind of break up the city into larger areas that we do coordinated planning. So far we've talked across the land use planning team, transportation planning, and parks planners, and just trying to figure out how we can better coordinate each of our topic areas and work towards these community visions in these areas and working with the broader community. So recognizing some of our neighborhood association boundaries are really small and may not require as detailed of planning. And some of it makes a lot of sense, like River Road in Santa Clara is about 1/5 of Eugene. So it's already a huge area, and it aligns well with the Parks Neighborhood Planning District boundary, as well as Bethel.
Yeah, well said, Chelsea. I will just echo that the idea comes from the Parks and Open Space Division. They already do this. It seems to work really well for them. And kind of recognizing the shift from neighborhood-based planning that we did a lot of in the 70s, 80s, and 90s to more of an equitable approach by larger district of the city is the direction that planning is going nationally. And so it seemed like a good opportunity, starting with River Road and Santa Clara, which are a full 1/5 of the city of Eugene, to implement that kind of model going forward across work groups and topics.
And then, so the same idea as what we did here of having more than one neighborhood association is involved in the process. You know, they're an important component of the work, but not the only component. And I too really appreciate the expansiveness of this plan. And, you know, I was probably a little naive when this started in terms of my experience as a counselor and didn't really recognize that it was so different in terms of the scope from other area plans. So, and the thoughtfulness put into it. And I think the fact that we had hundreds of people participate, I doubt that we would have had hundreds of people participate if it had been strictly about land use code. But the fact that we were offering people an opportunity to create a vision that included, a myriad of things that they relate to as being part of a neighborhood, part of a community, beyond just, what are they allowed to do on their property? I think really inspired people to participate, as well as then resulting in this product that we can really use to help kind of determine the way forward that meets that vision and those goals. So thanks.
Thank you. And Mike, another comment?
Yes, Mayor, I appreciate that. Thank you. During the slide presentation, I saw some faces of friends in there too, and along with John Belcher's comments, I just want to say thank you to, I saw Jerry Finnegan and Ed McMahon. I saw Ann, of course, in there too, and those in the Santa Clara area who have spent a lifetime of investment in the area. I want to appreciate them out loud as well. My question, I don't know if this is for Chelsea or for staff or maybe for Lauren, or if an end goal here is to create the special area zone that'll have both the larger vision stuff, but also then land use specifics. Talk with me about how the staff approaches that in the future. Is that then the defined and known direction that area wants to see development occur, and that staff takes that as the given, as the guide? Talk with me about how the staff sees a special area zone once created like that.
I can take a stab at it, and then if anyone else wants to add on. So the policies in the neighborhood plan will be that guidance to staff for development, but the special area zone will have specific code standards that will be adopted that will provide much more direct guidance and less squishy, more aspirational. So we'll be really clear about what development is allowed and what that will look like.
When you say guidance, in other words, it's staff's position to try to both accomplish and accommodate what's written in the special area zone, both from a specifics and ordinance level, and then also from a vision perspective.
I'll take a stab at that one. Just a little bit of context. The idea for using the tool of a special area zone has a lot of background behind it. We applied for and received, with the neighborhood support, a sizable grant from the Federal Transit Authority to study a future MX corridor along River Road. And so there was a lot of study into what kind of land use regulations the city, working with LTD, should apply to a transit corridor such as River Road. And over time, where our hope is that this special area zone can be adapted and used for other corridors around the city. So that is the best tool we have at the moment, the special area zone, but it's meant to be replicable in many ways.
But I'm asking the question of how staff views that once created. That's their guiding light on what you're supposed to accomplish, yes?
I'm not sure I understand the nuance of the question. Once it's adopted, it becomes code.
Yeah, it's in code and we follow the code.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let that one. I appreciate the answer, and we're getting closer, so I'm sure we'll talk more.
Okay, thank you. And I think if there are no other questions or comments, I will turn this over to Jennifer to put the motion on the table.
Thanks, Mayor. So I move to initiate a public review and adoption process for the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan, including associated comprehensive plan and refinement plan amendments, zone changes, and Group 1 land use code amendments in attachment B.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we're missing one person, so that passes. Thank you very much. I really, I think we are all so excited about this work and proud of all of you, volunteers and staff alike, who have brought us to this point. So yeah, go forth. We're happy to see this work in this place. And with that, I believe I will turn it back to the city manager to introduce our second agenda item.
Yep. I also want to give a thanks to Kate and John for being here and co-presenting. That was really nice. So your next work session, I know you've received a lot of information on ADUs, and I just wanted to remind everybody that that's the reason why we do these work sessions before a public hearing, because we know you're going to start hearing things from the public. We expect that, we hope for that. And we like to provide these opportunities so we can give you some general information that might be commented on and give you all the opportunity that you need to ask questions and understand kind of the context of what could happen or what might be said in the public hearing format. And then after that, we have another work session. So today you don't have to take any actions. We're just informational questions. And then after the public hearing, we have another work session scheduled that we can continue the conversation based on what you hear at the public hearing. So I felt like going into this, there was a lot of concern that something was happening today. And I just wanted to reassure you that you have some time. And I look forward to the conversation and questions. And I'm going to ask Jeff to just jump on in.
Thank you, City Manager. Good afternoon, councilors. I don't believe I've had the pleasure of meeting everybody, but my name is Jeff Gepper. I'm a senior planner in the planning division. I have picked up the mantle on this project from Alyssa Hansen, our planning director. And I'm also joined today by Lauren Summers with the City Attorney's Office. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quick. So I think you're all abundantly familiar with our ADU process that we started a while back. And so really I'm here to, like the City Manager introduced, give you a work session just to bring everybody back up to speed and provide that context for our public hearing that's going to be happening next week. So I'm going to be talking about finalizing compliance for our ADU process. And so really looking at this, where it all started with the state mandate that said, for every single family dwelling, the cities shall allow a single ADU, or at least a single ADU, right? So, and that's in any area zoned for single family dwellings. And the state really implemented this kind of in light of the ongoing, we're still in it, the housing crisis associated with availability and affordability moving forward. So once this was implemented, and looking at the process here where we started, this was actually state law back in 2017. It was originally Senate Bill 1051, now codified, and we refer to it as ORS 197-3125, or at least that's how I say it. Really rolls off the tongue. So when they first passed this, it's going to come as a surprise to no one in this group that it lacked a lot of clarity. So when the City Council took up action on this in 2018, the City Council did their best in light of that lack of clarity to engage in a process and adopt ordinances that were intended to meet state law. Those ordinances were appealed and ultimately remanded back to the city saying there are certain provisions within this that do not meet state law and you need to go and fix those. In 2019, we were, in the midst of that remand process, we learned that there were other state law changes that were coming down the pike that were going to add a little bit of clarity to that. And so we decided to wait until early 2020 to actually address that remand and adopt another ordinance. So last January in 2020, you all adopted an ordinance that attempted to once again deal with, complying with state law for accessory dwelling units. And that was in the face of having a lot of questions around what certain important components of how we regulate these are, which are siting and design. And I'll talk about those a little more in a little bit. That ordinance was also appealed. And the important thing here is, you'll see on my slide, it says COA, that stands for Court of Appeals. There was another land use case that was going through the courts, known as Camps Hughes, that was ultimately going to be adding a lot of clarity to the ADU situation. And so in July of 2020, so this is after your last ordinance was passed, the Court of Appeals issued a decision on something called Camps Hughes. It's another Eugene-specific case law that we set that really provided some good, clear guidance for how the state actually meant for this, for ORS 197-312 to actually apply in response to ADUs. And so following that guidance from the Court of Appeals, LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals, remanded our ordinance back to us and basically said, here are the guide rails, here's what you need to do in order to bring your ordinance and your process into compliance with state law. And so that's essentially what we've brought to you today with the draft ordinances that we put in front of you. And just looking at that number, 2021, we're now years into this process. And I think there's a couple of things that are really important to think about here, which is that, one, this state law, unlike other state laws, applies directly. So if somebody came in to the city here and applied for a building permit for an ADU, and for whatever reason, certain provisions within our code don't allow it. If the state law will trump us in that situation and say, you do need to allow it. So we are following state law, and we aren't able to apply some of Eugene code provisions for that reason. And so that's why it's really important that we are engaging in this process to finalize this compliance so we can have applicable ADU codes that we can apply across the city. And in attachment A, the AIS is a much more detailed, less rambling version of what I just gave you for the history. And here is what came out of the Court of Appeals. So there's kind of 4 main components of this. The first being is that on every lot in a city where the city code allows a single family dwelling, it must allow at least 1 ADU per single family dwelling. So that's kind of, goalpost number 1. The other thing is relating to siting and design. And these are some of the key components that you as city councilors were asking us when we were going through this process. Tell us what siting and design means. And we were just kind of reaching in the dark saying, we think it's this, we think it's that. Well, we now know that for siting, it relates to where an ADU can be placed on an individual lot that has a single family dwelling. So that rules out things like maximum density. It rules out things like lot area, lot dimensions. It's about where the ADU is going to be located on that lot. Next, thinking about design, it's about the layout of the ADU itself and the materials used in the ADU's fabrication. So we now have clear definitions for what siting and design mean and how we can regulate ADUs within the city. And then the third one is that our development standards need to be moderate. They can't be extreme, absurd, or excessive. So with that in mind, here's how staff went about developing the code changes that are in front of you. We started with your 2020 ordinance because so much work and effort and time went into that process. I mean, if you think about the fact that you approved new standards for how to develop an ADU above a garage. You developed new standards for slope setbacks that would make it a little bit easier to develop ADUs. These were all code changes that we currently can't implement because they're not adopted code because of the remand, and yet all that work is still there. So we started with that 2020 ordinance. We look at the appeal. We take into account the Court of Appeals. That's what I was just talking about, those goalposts. And then we look at the LUBA specific remand, and we take all those things into account and we put it into our draft ordinance. And why it's important to think about that whole process is because the LUBA remand calls out very specific items that were actually appealed. But with this Court of Appeals thing, we now know what within this process won't meet state law. So there's no point in adopting code provisions that aren't going to meet state law based on that guidance. So we've basically made changes to meet both the Court of Appeals determinations as well as the LUBA remands, so that we're that's why we call it finalizing compliance, because we feel like we finally have a clear and direct process to go about this. So in attachment D, we have the standard draft ordinance with the legislative changes, but you'll see we also provided another one that has highlighted changes. And those are the ones where it's actually changes that are substantive from the 2020 ordinance. We wanted to give you a clear, concise version that you could see what actually changed since the last one you adopted. And there's really 5 key things here that have really changed. And this is covered in that summary document that's also as part of the AIS. But the biggest thing is that we need to allow ADUs on all lots. That includes flag lots and alley access lots that currently wasn't in there in the past. Remove regulations that limit ADUs based on maximum density or also lot dimensions and lot area. Remove regulations for the number of people that can occupy accessory dwelling units or just the property as a whole. And then also last was just, there were some provisions that still in certain ways required on-site parking, which isn't allowed by the state law. So all those changes are those are made within this proposal to comply with the ORS in this case. And so we're looking at next steps. On May 17th, we're going to hold a public hearing, which is why we're doing this now, to key you in for and get prepared for that public testimony. We've already received, I think as you're well aware, a fair amount of public testimony. So that'll be available, not only included with your AIS, but we also have a website that's updated with this information. And then on May 24th, we're scheduled for our first deliberation and potential action date. And with that, I will open it up to the councilors.
Thank you very much for walking us through that. That was very succinct and very clear. And I see that Mike has his hand raised, so I'll turn it over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the presentation, and I appreciated Sarah's preliminary presentation there, that we're just having a good talk today. The first thing I would say is that one of the things I love most about all the work that's been going on in Santa Clara and River Road is that it's a very bottom-up approach. It's a very, the people in the area are saying, this is how we want to live. And these are, we understand the rules, and we're trying to work within them, and we're trying to establish a framework for long-term expectations. And it's not a top-down sort of, here's how you will live. It's a very bottom-up, hey, we want to work within the system and express our preferences. And the council is wise enough, I think, to look at that and respect it. I think that House Bill 2001 and some of the others mentioned with regard to ADUs and other things are horrible policy. I think they're absolutely horrible policy. I think that they will be destructive to neighborhood livability. I think that they are designed to try and solve a problem that won't be solved. When we first started these conversations around ADUs, construction costs were about $215 a square foot. Today, materials costs are more than double that. So if you want to build an 800 square foot ADU in your backyard, it's closer to $400 or better a square foot. You're going to spend 300 grand in materials to build an 800 square foot ADU. We can adopt all the policy we want, but I doubt very much any will be built anytime soon, no matter what we do. This city has never had a problem saying no to top-down approaches. We are a sanctuary city because we said to the federal government, yeah, we know that's the law, but we don't like it very much here and we don't want to live that way. We've never had a problem expressing to the state legislature our disapproval of a top-down approach. And I continue to think that their policy solutions in this area are horrible, but most important, I think that other special area zones like the ones in Jefferson West Side and Chambers Special Area Zone were adopted, and those neighborhood plans were adopted in a very similar way to what happened in Santa Clara and River Road. And their preferences should be respected every bit as much and should guide us every bit as much about how we see development in those areas. And they're strongly protesting some of this, and we need to pay more respect to their point of view. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily.
Thank you, and thank you, Mike, for starting that conversation. Obviously, I have concerns about what's happening in the special area zones in Ward 1, and that would also make me have concern about everybody's special area zones. I think, and I'm never 100%, but I'm pretty sure that the changes to the special area zones that have come since the appeal, so we haven't seen them before because they're not part of the loop, are making changes to special area zones that are being incorporated into this ordinance because they're going to have to be incorporated, and we don't want to have to do it twice. But the neighborhoods are feeling that they did not get sufficient time to put feedback onto those changes, and they would like to have that time before the public hearing. So the public hearing is about changes they didn't have their opinion, if at all possible. So I'm not sure if the way that they're written now is absolutely the only way to fit in with the Court of Appeals decisions, or if there's any leeway. And if there is leeway, it would make sense to let the neighborhoods participate since we still have time. I know that we want to get it done, but we're not up against the deadline yet. And what's really happening is that we're going with the rules that we got in the beginning because our ordinance is null right now. So I'd like to know the answers to those. And I also think it would be helpful to know the order of who comes out on top. I mean, first the state, and then the city. Does that mean our metro plan? And then the special area zones are they on top of the metro plan? So I'm a little confused about who's got the top dog position when you've got a piece of land. So those are my questions for now. It'd be great if you could answer some of them.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Semple. I'll start with the second question, which is about who's on top in this situation, like you were asking. So in this case, we have state law that applies directly to the city. So in those cases where the Eugene's land use code is not currently in line with state law will trump Eugene's land use code. The special area zones, as well as all zones, are considered the same in that regard. So no special area zone or individual zone otherwise is considered differently when it comes to state law trumping the land use code for this ADU legislation. That's irrespective of the metro plan, special area plans, et cetera, because of the way that the state law is written. And Lauren Summers can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but.
Jeff, that's accurate. Councilor Semple, to give you a little bit more context, and Jeff, you feel free to jump in with me. In terms of the hierarchy of sort of land use controls, what we look at is the state wins, and then we have our comprehensive plan, and we have refinement plans that are part of, associated with our comprehensive plan. And what River Road Santa Clara is proposing that you just heard talked about is a refinement plan, a neighborhood plan. And then below that, we have our land use code, which needs to comply both with state law and our comprehensive plans. That land use code includes all of our zoning designations, including special area zones, which are area zoning that is limited to a particular area of the city versus like our R1 zone, which is found throughout the city. Yeah, I think that's everything. So that is the overall hierarchy to answer that portion of the question. And then Jeff is correct that in this case, because of the way the state law is written right now, we have to comply with state law. And so if we have a code provision that does not comply with state law, planning staff cannot implement it. So what is this proposed ordinance would make sure that our code is written in a way that complies with state law and the way that planning staff is already required to implement it to comply with state law, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Lauren. And to answer your second question about public participation and input, just to cover this briefly, we provided, kind of in anticipation that people would want more time to review this, we made the decision in the planning division to put out a draft copy of this ordinance a month in advance of today's public hearing. So notice went out to DLCD on April 12th that the public hearing is happening on the 17th, and then it went out on the 13th to interested parties. And then this draft ordinance was made available on April 16th. So we feel that in this time, people will be able to review these ordinances. And then over the next, during this legislative process, we will be able to continue to accept public testimony for your review and consideration throughout this process. And one thing to also bear in mind is that we are dealing with a remand from LUBA. So traditionally this process in terms of a code amendment would go through the planning commission and all that. But in this instance, it's coming back to the city council as the decision makers on the ordinance previously. So please let me know if you have any follow-up questions around that. And for now, I'll hand it back.
I have a question. How was this draft plan advertised? How was it sent out to people? Because I didn't know that 2 special area zones in my ward were up against some substantial density changes. And I know ADUs don't count for density, which is mind-boggling. So do you feel that people had enough time to react, or are we just gonna put out what you've got and then have people react and then rewrite it if necessary? Then will we need another public hearing? I mean, should we look at it more in depth before the first public hearing? What's the amount of time? Thanks.
Any comments on that?
Yeah, I'll just really quickly speak to that. Right now we're following, when things are coming back to us on remand, we don't necessarily have the traditional land use procedures that we would through legislative code amendments. And so we're following what we felt was the best practice in this case, which was to get it out earlier than is required by our charter statutes and our charter requirements and public notice requirements to DLCD. So in this instance, we do feel like we're following an appropriate course of action for these proposed changes. And I don't think that, I think people will have time at the upcoming public hearing as well to provide that public testimony. So I'll stop there.
And I can speak real briefly to the question about another public hearing and that component of your question, Councilor Semple. If the outcome, or if you hear a lot of public testimony at this first public hearing and it prompts you to want to have further discussions or make some, substantial changes to the ordinance in response, it may be that you want to have another public hearing, or that you'll need to have another public hearing because the changes are of such that it warrants another public hearing on those ordinance changes. So that certainly is within the range of what council could or want to do.
Okay, Matt and then Jennifer.
Thanks, Mayor. This question is, I got a quick one for Jeff or for Lauren or Catherine. Considering state law clearly supersedes local land use ordinance, it seems clear to me, this is HOA related, by the way. It seems clear to me, but I just want to be assured because it's been brought up a couple different times at our local neighborhood association meeting. Would state law supersede HOA contracts?
Councilor Keating, I'll take a run at that. It's a question that has come up also in the middle housing code discussions. What do you HOA agreements, CC&Rs, et cetera, how do they kind of play into the whole state law, local law issue? And I'm speaking about this very broadly because HOAs are different, agreements are different, but generally, state law, as Jeff said, requires us in terms of ADUs to allow an ADU for every single family dwelling in a single family zoned area. So if someone came to the city with an application to build an ADU, we would say yes, as long as it met our reasonable regulations related to siting and design. And we would say yes, regardless of whether there was an HOA agreement that prohibited it or CC&Rs or something that prohibited it. In fact, we have a code provision in our land use code that specifically says we don't consider those things because that's outside the scope of the land use realm. What might happen is that the person who builds the ADU could be, sued for violating their CC&Rs or for violating the HOA agreement, but that's a private contract action that is outside of the land use realm.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Jennifer, and then Claire.
Thank you. So first off, I want to thank you for this report. It was very helpful, and I especially liked the history section where you kind of broke down, because sometimes we lose track of what we have done over multiple years. So it was very easy to understand how we got here and what we have done and what we haven't done. Thank you very much. So I'm sure other counselors did as well. I received this report from the Jefferson Westside neighbors, and thank you very much to you guys for sending this if you're watching. I just want to kind of understand where they're at. I'm sure you guys have heard from them. It looks like to me that their concerns are kind of once they hit these larger lots. And the way it is written, and maybe I don't understand, they're concerned that we're going well beyond what we are required to do for these larger lots for density. And I'm just wondering if you can kind of explain if that's really accurate or just a perception or how that works.
Yeah, I'll take a run at that one. So the Jefferson, basically the way that the Jefferson Westside is written is that for every so many square feet within, for lot area, if your lot is 4,499 square feet or lower, you get one single family dwelling, and therefore you get one ADU. And then as you move into the next lot area range, which is 5,000 to 8,999, you get two single family dwelling units, and therefore each one of those single family units will get an ADU as well.
Okay.
And so that's how that works. And we're essentially we are following state law by any time that their code is allowing a single family dwelling unit, we are allowing an ADU to also be applied to that lot. And so, and that's how we're treating it across the board throughout the code. It's just, if there's a single family dwelling unit, you get an ADU. If it's
that makes total sense now. Okay, I get what you're doing. So that's why it bumps up to 4, because you could have 2 houses, therefore you can have 2 ADUs. And because of math, that is why we get to those numbers. Okay, so so that totally makes sense to me now. And I assume this is what we're doing for the rest of the city.
That's correct, yeah.
It's consistent with the rest of the city. Okay, so I guess that pretty much answers all my questions. Okay, well, great. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Claire, and then Alan.
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess the main takeaway from this conversation, to kind of put it in simple terms, is that our ordinance doesn't comport with state law. And we are referring it to a public hearing, and then we'll vote on an ordinance that hopefully does comport with state law. And whether we believe that law was good policy or not, and this council took some pretty strong statements around that when we had the opportunity. So we made our displeasure known about the policy. It doesn't matter. We have to meet state law. And so this is maybe a rhetorical question, but, so Jeff, do we have discretion around things like we can't include ADU in the density calculation, allowing ADUs on flag lots, or the prohibition on parking requirements? Do we have discretion around those things?
So that was specifically, those items that you just addressed were specifically called out within LUBA's remand that said we cannot apply maximum density, we cannot apply lot area, lot dimensions to restrict or limit ADUs. So in that way, we know for certain that we under state law cannot do that. And any ordinance that we do adopt would be, if we tried to apply one of those, we would be inconsistent with state law at that time.
So I think it's really important that we be clear with the public, including these neighborhood associations who are worried about what we're putting out, where we have discretion and where we do not. Where all of the testimony in the world, we can't change state law. And we're not going to be able to do it. If we want to have an ordinance, we can actually enforce. So I think our communications on this need to delineate those things, because there may be places where we do have some discretion. And if there's criticism that, some folks don't want us to go as far in terms of allowance as the draft code, we should get that feedback and we should consider it. But we're doing a disservice to the public if we say, give us feedback on this ordinance, and they tell us, we need parking requirements, we don't want them on flag lots, and then we have to turn around and say, oops, sorry, we don't get to do anything about that. So that's my request of staff as we move forward to a public hearing and how we set up this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. And then I see Mike needs a second round.
Thank you, Mayor. Good packet. I especially like the history section. That was very helpful. And Lauren, your explanation of the hierarchy of law was Emily Jerome comparison worthy. So, and that's pretty high praise. Where is Emily, by the way? Follow on to Councilor Keating's question about the HOA and CCRs. So I understand that's a private action. Question I had was, Lauren, maybe you could follow up. But so if it's legal to do an ADU and the law requires it, isn't that an affirmative defense and therefore the HOA loses?
Great question, Councilor.
Yes, no question.
That is outside the realm of my expertise, and I would not, I don't want to guess about that. But it's certainly, like I said, from a land use perspective, the city would not deny an application that complied with state law, our code, and whichever reasonable regulations related to siting and design are adopted. Whether or not that becomes a private right of action against the person under other circumstances, the city is not involved in that. That's between those two private parties, and they would have to figure it out.
And it would probably depend on the specifics of the CCR and the covenants of other things, the contract. Okay. As Claire said, I don't like HB 2001 either, especially its cookie cutter approach. I think in some cases, especially around the University of Oregon, it's going to result in the exact opposite of what it's trying to do, which is to create affordable housing units. We're going to get affordable housing units that are going to get ripped down and market stuff's going to be put in its place. So I think the cookie cutter aspects of 2001 are going to be problematic. I do agree with on corridors that it's probably a good thing, but so as Claire said, and other people have said, it is the law of the land. And we don't get to choose which laws we like or don't like, or which ones we enforce and which ones we don't enforce. The remedy here, if you don't like this, is go to the legislature, not the city council. I appreciate Claire asking for clarity on our discretion and where we have discretion, but in this case, there isn't that much discretion we have here. it's very limited, and especially with the LUBA rulings and that have come down. So we're going to move forward with this, whether we like it or not. We just have to make our rules comply with the state law. And if we don't, the state law just comes in and overrides us. Isn't that correct? We just, that model ordinance that LUBA put together becomes our ordinance in effect if we choose not to do anything. And so it makes sense for us to kind of craft our Eugene own type process and ordinance with the modest amount of discretion that we do have to do its best for under the circumstances. Ding.
Thank you. Randy, I'll let you, Randy, and then Mike and Emily can have second rounds.
I really like the ding thing. I think we should adopt it. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. You done, Alan? Thank you, Mayor. That's this has been helpful. I've been fascinated by the discussion. In fact, I almost felt like too much of a spectator here. But you know, one thing that would be really helpful for me is, I mean, we've received volumes of information on this, you know, even the short time I've been on council. It would be helpful if we just had a very simple fact sheet of what is discretion and what is not. And if there was a way to publish that before the public hearing, it might help make what is spoken on the night of the hearing to us a little easier to process. Just something, you know, simple. Can you confine it to one page if you can, with just kind of these basic pieces. Because what I'm interpreting from this is we really have very little discretion, but wherever we have it, to know what that is, to know how to wait and listen to what the public testifies on would really help me process this. I don't know if anyone else feels the same way, but I'm hearing what sounds like other counselors have been a little confused about this as well. So anyway, appreciate the discussion. If you could say whether that's possible or not and how long that would take to put out, because the public hearing is coming right up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Groves. I will work on, we do have some summary documents, but they do normally span the 2 pages. So I will see what I can do to at least create a fact sheet that's a single page and easily digestible. I will post it on our website and at least get that available on the website before the public hearing so that people are able to review that.
I appreciate that. It doesn't have to be exactly 1 page. If you need to go over that, I mean, I just want something that's almost, you know, bulleted, and then, you know, make sure we get that to the public. It might save more confusion on that night. And then I'll also remind the public that's listening, there's also a public forum. Well, you can't speak at a public forum if it's going to be a hearing that night. So I guess that precludes that. So there won't be any public forums that are separate from the night we have the public hearing before we have the hearing, correct? I think that's what I saw looking at the calendar.
I think because the public hearing is next Monday. So that's
Right.
your next meeting.
Got it. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mike and then Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. And with an overabundance of respect for my good friend Ellen, there are a whole list of federal and state laws that we don't enforce in Eugene. I named one earlier, and if you'd like a list, I'll be happy to get those for you, because our values differ from those values of state or federal law. We've chosen differently. I think we should do the same in this case, and to the extent we can, without creating a silly waste of money in the process, we ought to do as little as possible as is required to comply. And on that line, Jeff, you just mentioned that Jefferson Westside has what I thought at the time was a groundbreaking and a very forward-thinking way of accommodating more density by going above and beyond what they needed to do when they adopted in the first place, and essentially make room for ADUs to be built years ago by putting that second by in those larger lots, allowing for greater density there and saying you could build a second unit. So here's my question. Is our interpretation of 4 or 2 and then each having an ADU, is that discretionary?
So no, they currently allow 2 single-family dwellings on those lots, and therefore, because they allow 2 single-family dwellings, we must allow them to each of those detached single families.
Our definition of what that specific code allows, there's nothing discretionary about that. In other words, in the way that that's written in the special area zone, we can't say that's a house that already has an ADU if there is a second one there.
If a house, so if I can just quickly clarify, Lauren, if a house, so each single family dwelling is permitted 1 accessory dwelling unit. If a house already has a single accessory dwelling unit, it is not permitted a second. So I don't know if that helps clarify your question. Maybe
now we're defining house discretionary.
So Councilor Clark, if I could jump in, and maybe this will be helpful, maybe it won't. And Jeff, please feel free to correct me if I'm off base, because as Councilor Solinka noted, where is Emily? I'm filling in for her today. So here's what I understand is happening with the specifically the Jefferson Westside and Chambers Special Area Zones kind of tables. Currently, the tables are set up as Jeff described. So I'm rounding, but basically under 4,500 square feet and under lots, 1 single family home, 4,500 square feet to 9,000 square feet to et cetera. Because of the way that the state law is written, and it says an ADU for every single family home, and because what staff did was just sort of carry the table as written through into this ordinance, each of those single family homes will get an ADU. Is there a different way to draft that? Maybe. And so that's where I'm kind of looking to Jeff to see. I think the way that it's drafted complies with state law, but as Councilor Surratt asked, Councilor Dragos, where do we have discretion?
Yeah. And that's my point. We
need a little bit more time to look at it, I think. And we can get back to you on that question.
Well, and that's really my point. I agree with Randy that this would be better if it were easier and more black and white, but it's not. There's discretionary interpretation for a lot of this. And so I'll state again, I think that the neighborhood's predetermined plan that they spend ungodly amounts of hours involved in ought to control or ought to direct us. And I think that when there is a piece like this that can be interpreted, it is my opinion, it should be interpreted at the very minimum capacity of compliance with state law. So I hope that will advise as we move forward with this. The other thing I was wondering, Jeff, is that you'd mentioned the ordinance was available on April 16th. From what I've read, input from what I would consider some of the most involved stakeholders, they were not able to get a hold of it until May 5th. Can you help me understand that?
So at the time that we published the draft ordinance, so we had a draft ordinance that was available April 16th. On May 5th, we published the draft ordinance to the public hearing, and there were some amendments to that. So the final version of that, they were minimal, but they did have impacts within the special chambers area as well as some other
so some of those affect folks. So some of those affected folks have only had the ordinance for 6 days, right?
Up to the public hearing, they'll have had it for at a minimum of 10, I believe. Or whatever the charter requirement is, yeah.
Before our discussion was my point. So they haven't really had it that long. It seemed in your presentation as though you were suggesting they've had it for a while. And I was just trying to say there are a lot of interested stakeholders who have not. I have one other point, but I'll let it go in the interest of time. Thanks.
Okay, Emily.
My question goes along with what Mike's saying. I'm pretty sure that when we were talking about ADUs to start with and special area zone, Jefferson, etc., that we went through a lot of what we were going to call their second building, and that it wasn't an ADU, but we were going to treat it the exact same way, but they could still call it a second dwelling unit. So if that's true and we're treating them the same way, then they would get one ADU, not two buildings and two ADUs. What's up with that?
I think we're potentially looking at, I think what we were talking about were lots that were greater than 5,000 square feet, which would be granted 2 single family dwelling units. And then that each of those would get an ADU. So the Jefferson West Side does have a unique way to that, or the special Jefferson West Side zone has a unique way of defining an ADU. However, within those tables, it still results in the same effect, which is that for every single family unit or every single family dwelling, the result is that each single family dwelling gets an accessory dwelling unit as defined under the special Jefferson West Side zone. The same can be said for the special chambers.
Councilor Semple, I think maybe your question is getting at, there are sort of 2 different ways to look at it. As I'm sure all councilors remember, my recollection is when you were discussing this ordinance at the beginning, there was a question about whether ADUs should be called ADUs in Jefferson West Side Special Area Zone or called something else. And I believe that the folks in that special area zone didn't want them to be called ADUs. They wanted them to be called the second single family dwelling. And the argument was, it still complies with the law because folks are allowed 2 dwelling units on a lot. In R1, that would be single family and an ADU. In Jefferson West Side, it would be single family and second single family. So whether we call it an ADU or we call it second single family, you're still getting those 2 dwelling units on a lot. That's sort of the initial way of looking at it. Does the 2 single family dwelling units comply with the requirement for an ADU? Then the question is, does that second single family dwelling also get its own ADU? And that might be, again, something that we need to come back to you with more information on before deliberation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Did we have any other councilors needing to make a comment? I just wanted to say a couple of things about this before we close, and I know we're at time, but I would just want to offer perspective on this, which is that you have had in-depth conversations about this since 2018. The last round was very in-depth with a lot of public input, and there's a lot of support around that. That we all know that ADUs are actually a very small part of the housing supply challenge, and that a lot of people are not going to build ADUs because they're expensive to build. So, you know, I feel that this council you have done your work over and over. There clearly are some points of clarification that staff can provide, but really it's state law. You've deliberated. It really is time. I think I'm glad we're going to a public hearing. It's time to move on because you have other bigger issues that are going to have more impact on housing than ADUs are going to have. And so let's resolve as much as we can where there's discretion, but let's move on because there are bigger things to do and more important that are going to have a greater impact. And this is not the time to stall out again and say, let's delay the process. So that's my plea to you. And thank you all for the discussion. Thank you very much for the information, and we are adjourned if there are no other comments. Thank you.